Victorians identified the Buddha with various mythological and divine figures such as the Scandinavian god Odin, Neptune, Osiris, Jupiter, Brahma, Pan, and Apollo, Krishna, Shiva, and incarnation of the god Vishnu, etc. until about 1830. Moreover, throughout the first half of the century, a concept of two Buddhas was also prevalent, one founder and the other reformer. However, by the middle of the century, the historical existence of the Buddha was established as a human figure, one to be compared not with the gods, but with other historical personalities. It initiated the quest for an historically viable account of his life. The search for historical Buddha, as opposed to mythical, was influenced by the 19th century quest for the historical Jesus. Being a product of the 19th century England, the Light of Asia was influenced by the contemporary discourse about Buddhism. Thus, living in this ideological atmosphere dominated by the nostalgia for origins, Arnold brought to Buddhism the same critical assumptions that prevailed in liberal Protestantism, especially the belief that the most primitive form of any doctrine is necessarily the truest, and the later developments of perversions fostered by priests and theologians. He followed the Hinayana or the Theravada school of Buddhism, which is a more austere faith and a more primitive tradition. Therefore, he was not going to accept a Buddhist version of beliefs which he had already rejected in Christianity. He was not interested in orthodoxy. He was writing a quest of the historical Buddha. Thus, in the preface to the Light of Asia, he asserts his firm belief in the historical existence of the Buddha, saying that the Buddha of this poem, if as need not be doubted, really existed, was born on the borders of Nepal about 620 BC and died about 543 BC at Kusinagara in Oudh. As mentioned earlier, by the middle of the century, the historical existence of the Buddha was established as a human figure. Arnold, who followed the Theravada school of Buddhism that worships no supreme god and regards Buddha as in every respect a man rather than the embodiment of some divine principles, depicts the Buddha as man, not as God, although he possesses godlike qualities and appearance. In fact, the Buddha of the poem identifies himself as man, saying, "I am as all these men who cry upon gods." At another place he says, "Me who am no god, but one, thy brother." Since the establishment of the historicity of the Buddha, Buddhism was admired not to anything intrinsic to it as a religion, but to the personality and character of its founder. He was praised for his personal qualities such as truthfulness, humility, chastity, patience, self-sacrifice, noble physique, superior mental endowments, sanctity of character, serene gentleness, wisdom and eloquence, intellectual originality, and above all, compassion and sympathy. In short, Almond concludes the Buddha was created by the Victorians was an ideal Victorian gentleman, clothed in the mantle of the Thomas Carlyle's great man, one of the heroes whose life had influenced the course of history. Therefore, it is not surprising that the Buddha of the Light of Asia is characterized with these qualities admired by the Victorians. So, here are a number of qualities that is manifested in the poem about the Buddha. I'm not going to discuss all of them in detail because we don't have enough time. I just give you a brief idea about it. So the first quality is humility and gentleness. There are several instances in the poem like this verse here that show his humility and gentleness. You know, for instance, when he goes to study with his teacher for the first time, he stood with eyes bent down before the sage, showing respect to the teacher, although his knowledge surpasses that of the teacher. And again, the poem says here, describes his gentleness according to in these lines. The next attribute of the Buddha as described in the poem is sanctity of his character. He was presented as a loyal husband who deeply loves his wife and family. Even though his father appointed many maids for him, he is totally dispassionate to them. He was also presented possessing majestic appearance and personality. There are several instances in the poem that show his majestic personality. So this is one instance in the poem that describe his good-looking personality and appearance through the perspective of the girls who came to participate in the court of pleasure organized to choose a wife for him. So here we see the author saying, the awe of majesty and several other phrases. He said, so passionless, gentle, but so beyond them, etc. So divine he seemed, so high and saint-like and above her world. Another instance of his godlike appearance is also given through a woman who saw him while he was wandering. So here is the instance. When she saw her, the dark surprised eyes of some Indian maid would dwell in sudden love and worship deep on that majestic form, etc. And Kisa Gautami describes the Buddha's brow is like a god's. There is another instance given by Sujata's maid Radha. When she saw him sitting under the jambu tree, she thought she saw a god because of his majestic appearance. Okay, another feature of the Buddha as described in the poem is as an optimistic Buddha. So we see him saying several times like, there must be aid, there must be help. And again he says, there must be refuge. And also in one monologue he says about the inventiveness of human beings, and then that's all the sacrifice and strife of human beings throughout the history that shows his knowledge about the struggle of human beings. And later on we see him saying that since there is hope for man only in man. So all these lines and phrases show present him as an optimistic Buddha, which was very conducive to the contemporary Victorian England. The most important quality that was admired by the Victorians was the sympathetic and compassionate Buddha. There are numerous examples in the poem that describe his compassionateness. So this is the first example. When he was still a child, he showed his compassionate to the animals and his playmates. And then on the second day of his, there is another instance in the royal garden when he heals a swan shot by his cousin Devadatta and saves it from him. And another instance is on the second day of his visit when he hear a mournful voice that was coming from the roadside, and he immediately runs to him and comforts him. When Channa, his charioteer, requests him not to hold him since he might also be infected, the prince is so kind that he does not care about being infected and still keeps comforting him. So another instance is when he was wandering, it is said that, and oftentimes as he paced, gentle and slow, radiant with heavenly pity, lost in care for those he knew not, save as fellow lives. So this another attribute of the Buddha was described as his boundless self-sacrifice. There are several instances in the poem that talk about this attribute of the Buddha. I'm not going to describe it in detail. There are other instances of like that. So the next attribute is enthusiasm for humanity. He asks at one point in the poem, why have I never seen and never sought? Tell me what lies beyond our brazen gates. He wanted to know what lies beyond the four walls of the palace. And another place he says that he requests his father to let him explore the daily life of the people. Another quality of him is his eloquence. So there are several instances that show his eloquence in the poem. For example, when he gives a talk to Bimbisara about stopping the sacrifice, so his talk was so convincing and persuasive that the king proclaimed a decree about stopping and killing animals. So another information about his manner of speech is given by the 9 messengers and 9 horsemen who were sent by the king and Yasodhara respectively to ask him come back home. But when they saw him, when they went there, he was talking, giving a talk in the bamboo garden. But they were so impressed at his speech that they forgot what they went for. So this is an instance of his commanding and beautiful speech. Another quality is his wisdom and intellectual originality. So we see several of his several places in the poem that describes his wisdom. Even since his childhood, as the saints and dream readers describe him as child of wondrous wisdom. And also here another instance, Asita, the sage, predicts that the prince will fill the world with wisdoms and etc. And even his teacher said that he is the prince is the teacher, not the teacher himself, admiring his knowledge that surpasses his own knowledge. And also his meeting with Alara, Uddra, and other philosophers with whom he learned and discussed about philosophy but was not satisfied and went his own way to discover the truth.
Excuse me, Mr. Kazal.
Yes.
Now the time's up. You conclude your presentation.
Okay. So one of the most important way of presenting the Buddha was as the Martin Luther of India, as an opponent of caste system and priesthood. So according to Jonathan Silk, within a British colonial context, it was mainly as a counter to the predominant Hindu system in India that the Buddha could be of use, because in this he was aligning himself with the vast majority of Victorians